Hey everyone, it's Dr. Naomi Wolf of DailyClout, and I'm really honored and thrilled to be here with two of my personal heroes, Steve Deace and Daniel Horowitz, who have written an incredible book, incredibly thought-provoking, super disturbing, utterly timely, called Rise of the Fourth Reich, Confronting COVID Fascism with a New Nuremberg Trial so this never happens again. Welcome, Steve and Daniel.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Naomi.
Great to be with you in these dire times.
It is great to be together in these dire times. And for people who may not be as familiar as everyone should be with the work of Daniel and Steve, let me tell you a little bit about them. They're both unbelievably distinguished. Daniel Horowitz is senior editor of The Blaze, and he's the co-founder of the Conservative Review. He writes in-depth daily columns, that's a lot, about the hypocrisy of Washington from a conservative perspective. And he has a nationally syndicated podcast, The Conservative Review, and is also the author of Stolen Sovereignty, How to Stop Unelected Judges from Transforming America. He lives in Central Maryland. He's got, oh my gosh, 4 children and a wife. So we definitely appreciate you taking the time in the evening to talk to us, because I'm sure it's busy where you are. And Steve Deace, equally distinguished, author of numerous books, including the #1 bestseller, way ahead of the curve, Faucian Bargain, the most powerful and dangerous bureaucrat in American history. He also wrote a book in 2016, A Nefarious Plot, which became a major motion picture. He writes for many national publications and worked on political campaigns from school board to president of the United States. And he also hosts the Steve Deace Show, one of the top 100 daily news podcasts in the country for The Blaze. And he lives in Iowa with his wife and children. So again, welcome, gentlemen, and let's launch right in, if we may. So of all of the things we could talk about, most urgent, we need to talk about this amazing book you've written. I'm Jewish. Daniel's Jewish. Steve probably isn't Jewish. Doesn't matter. We all know about the Holocaust.
I go to church and worship a Jew. Does that count? Does that count?
I think
okay. I'm Jew adjacent. Okay, gotcha.
You're definitely Jew adjacent.
Okay.
But I bring that up because a lot of people might say, and I'm sure you've heard this, isn't it going too far to use a title like the Forth Reich? And Daniel and I spoke about that early on when your book was being written. And I was like, I don't think that's going too far at all. And my grandmother lost 9 brothers and sisters in the Holocaust. But tell me why it's not going too far. Tell me why you chose that very risky confrontational title.
Sure. So Naomi, I mean, obviously you've gone through this tragedy, this saga along with us. And it's funny, I would say the 2 most important books on this topic right now that have come out the last couple of weeks are certainly The Rise of the Fourth Reich, but also your ebook that you've done with War Room. Mm-hmm. This is more of the consumable story version of all the data and analysis you have in that ebook. And what they both give over in different styles is that they knew. So I think we already know between all of our work that clearly more people have died from COVID fascism and all of its analogs than from the Holocaust, just in the short-term effects of the vaccine. And that's an endpoint already there. Then the question is the motivation. And that's what we get at in this book, that it is incontrovertibly clear that they knew exactly what their choice of prophylactics, their choice of measures against this pandemic would cause. And they did it anyway. But also then we take it a step further through the narration of a mock trial of our witnesses. It's not just a data science book. We've had a lot of that. It's wrapped around a legal moral principle that it is never okay to subsume an individual's right to bodily autonomy, right to live, right to access public accommodation, right to get services, medical treatment, for the better good of the nation. This public health nationalism, as you well know, Auschwitz didn't begin with Auschwitz. Public health nationalism was the lead ship in that armada, that if you do not follow our dictates, you are a threat to the state, you are dirty, you are unclean, and you forfeit your right to live. And that principle that has been laid down has still not been extirpated from our body politic, and that's why we write the book.
Yeah. Do you want to add to that, Steve?
Yeah, I used to be a strict adherent of an argumentation that's known as Godwins Law. The idea that if two people argue long enough, they'll eventually resort to calling each other a Nazi or make some kind of a Nazi analogy. It's a lazy, low-lying fruit form of argumentation. And so, I mean, I used to strictly, two things you can never do on my show: take the Lord's name in vain and break Godwin's law. I wouldn't allow it. Okay. And so I don't think you make these comparisons cavalierly. But when you're dealing with a global, Naomi, this has never happened in human history, that on March 16th, 2020, a Thanos snap literally happened. Almost the entire world, with very limited exceptions, almost the entire world said, we're going to all beat our swords into plowshares. We're going to just scrub our borders. Our ideological differences, the form of government differences we have, that we're canceling all of them. We're going to cancel flourishing, progress, prosperity, living, life, cancel it all, maybe for an indefinite, who knows how long period of time, without a shot fired, without a threat, without a negotiation, without a treaty, just bam. And right away, in its place came this global biomedical state of democide. And that is something we have not seen since the Third Reich attempted to impose it autocratically and authoritarian, and with authoritarianism via swords instead of plowshares, and tanks instead of treaties. In this case, everybody just said, we'll just do it to our own citizens ourselves. And so when we got together and thought about what to title this book, and if you read the book, the last interview we do with Vera Sharav, one of the final living Holocaust survivors in America, really, she is the closer. And the parallel she draws between how companies like Mercedes and IBM imposed many of the technological, technocratic enforcement mechanisms of the Third Reich, and how we saw that happen with private corporations here in the United States and throughout much of the developed world. And that was the final tally for us to go with this title. Now, Post Hill Press, our publisher, balked at it. And so, we sent them the introduction and said, hey, if after you read the introduction, you think this is too provocative and too hot and goes too far, we will come up with another title. And then after they read the introduction, like, man, now we're kind of thinking the book ought to be titled, Our Ancestors Went to War with Redcoats for Less Than This. Okay. Right. And that's before you even get to the testimonies. And in my opinion, I think that's what sets this book apart.
Yes.
Is the personal stories of the suffering, whether we're dealing with masks, jabs, lockdowns, lack of early treatment, medical kidnapping, every potential category of suffering that we witnessed the last few years is addressed in eyewitness testimonies. We have everyone on the record. We have everyone recorded, the actual raw audio of everybody. Wow. All right. And there's nobody anonymous. So we brought the receipts. And I think those testimonies, I'm getting emails from people like, I had to stop reading. And normally I read stuff like this at night, these testimonies. I'm getting so enraged, so angry that I can't sleep. I'm getting so worked up hearing these stories. When you remove the data and look at the stories, that's what I think really hammers these points home.
Well, absolutely. And I really want to appreciate both of you, because so many books have come out, and they're wonderful from like a medical or even kind of a clinically political perspective. And they're very, very necessary. But yours is one of the very few that's a narrative. And not only is it a narrative, and as you say, it surfaces those individual human stories. I mean, what's that famous quote, 1 billion deaths is a statistic, but a single death is a tragedy, right? Your book shows that so well by surfacing those human narratives. So decided daringly to put it in the format of a trial. One of the things I loved, I first encountered Steve Deace's work in the Faucian Bargain, his book, and it was a page turner. You guys are such good writers. So as a writerly writer, I just want to appreciate the writerliness of what you've done. And
thank you.
Also, it's so critical. And I also want to say, well, you've been validated. Because Vera Sharav's movie has come out titled Never Again Is Now. So, you were writing this book probably a year or more ago, and way ahead of the curve in being willing to look at history and see these parallels. And you've been abundantly confirmed by this kind of 6-segment long documentary, which compares the current moment to the Third Reich. Let me go back to something that Daniel said. Another reason I love you both is that you know history. And what scares me to death about where we are right now is that so many people don't know history. And so they can't appreciate, Steve, what you just said, which is this has never happened in human history before. And what I'm always tearing my hair out trying to convey to people is that if you study history, especially intellectual history, you should be prepared for the fact that things that have never happened before happen, right? So people are like, oh no, it can't be that it can't be that a corporation like Pfizer or Moderna would intentionally poison millions of people, but indeed, that's what we're seeing. So I just want to go back to what Daniel said and confirm that indeed, in the Third Reich, it was public health that was the initial hook for the whole society, and doctors and medical organizations were deputized to kind of lead with Nazi ideology.
Yeah.
Do you want to speak to that?
No, I was just going to say, Naomi, I mean, when you grow up, obviously, I didn't have any relatives that were directly in the Holocaust, but, I grew up in a Jewish community where you certainly, when I was a kid, it was very common. Anyone over 70, you'd have people either who fought in World War II or Europeans that came over that were indeed in the Holocaust. And what was always striking, and even until a few years ago, I was always befuddled by the fact that how did the greatest genocide take place in the most enlightened nation? This was not Rwanda, hundreds of years ago. This was the 20th century Germany. And then that's really where you find the hook of public health. They were extremely impressed by science and medicine and advancing, and they didn't want anything to get in their way of that betterment of society. We all like to say, oh, if I would have been there, I would have opposed that. That's ridiculous. And you see the outcome, the pictures of the concentration camps. But what we know is throughout the 1930s, and all academics and historians who study that era agree that doctors and scientists joined the Nazi Party earlier and at greater numbers because they were very impressed by that commitment to this public health nationalism. And it shocks me how we, to this day, 3 years after, everyone kind of laughs. Yeah, masks were stupid. Yeah, lockdowns were dumb. Yeah, but we have not overturned that legal premise. They call it Jacobson in the Supreme Court, that I could say you, without any due process, without any prima facie symptoms that have a disease, you, Naomi, are a threat to me. And you must take an affirmative action to your body to accommodate me and the national good. And if you don't, I could deny you an organ transplant. I could drum you out of society. I mean, that's not, it might happen one day. We just lived through it. And Steve and I were shocked that, wait a minute, we're just like moving on without fixing that, without even recognizing it. So the book is to recognize that, and then to offer a blueprint of how to fix it.
Excellent. And I'll put this to both of you. Of all the incredibly moving testimonials and stories, which do you think are the 2 or 3 most important?
I'll take that one first, because I think it was the very first interview we did was with Lieutenant Colonel Teresa Long. And the concept of doing the book like this, I modeled it after a book that was very influential on my own faith journey, where a religious skeptic went out and interviewed critically interviewed a bunch of people that believed in a religion he rejected and thought he was going to disprove them, and ended up not being able to defeat their arguments. And so I thought, let's do that with these expert witnesses. And the very first interview I think we did was Teresa Long, Daniel. And I remember I was down here in my man cave where we're taping this thing here tonight. And I don't know that I got a question in. Daniel just took the first question and she just started riffing. And keep in mind, at the time we did this interview, as you pointed out, I'd already written a #1 bestseller about this. I'd already kind of was one of the few from the day that the first rollout of the lockdowns with the Imperial College survey, they called BS on all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And so I thought I was pretty jaded. I thought you weren't going to shock me. Mm-hmm. Listening to her just roll off names in the military chain of command of people who either didn't want to know, or, like one of my favorite movies, Office Space. It's not that I'm lazy, Bob. It's that I just don't care, right? Like, didn't matter how much data she cited. I don't care, And I was just down here listening to this, and her and Daniel went on for an hour. That's a long time for me to be quiet. and I'm like that gif where the guy's jaw, he's like, and his jaw's on the floor, and I'm just down here listening to this by myself, and I'm wrecked. I'm just wrecked listening to her testimony. The government tried to stop her from testifying in courts of law and everything else. And I'm thinking, my goodness, if this is having this kind of an effect on me, mm-hmm. who has been really on the front lines of this story from a media perspective from the day that it emerged, mm-hmm. and interrupted all of our lives, I can't even imagine what this is going to do to the average person. So since that was the first one we did, and that really set a tone with me on a personal level, I'm going to go with that one.
Right. And so, wow. Yeah. Yep. Go ahead, Daniel.
No, so Naomi, I'm going to take that to the second step about our Scott Schara interview. What Steve is describing is the part of the book of the governmental malfeasance, particularly the military, which was, we now know, DOD, really more so than even HHS, was the key player behind all of this. But again, drawing back to the parallels of the Third Reich, is that, so, it will be abundantly clear from reading this book that they knew about it. They created the virus. They blocked the treatment for it. They knew from day one, and your ebook has all the receipts on that the vaccine was negative effective and damaged every organ system, including reproductive health. They knew that. But then there's the next layer that scared the heck out of me. And this really inspired me to write. And I wanted to tell it through narrative through this. The government level, you talk about public policy, data. What did you know? You're wrong. That my doctors say this, my scientists say this. What scared me is the second level, which is the people. Mm-hmm. How quickly the people not only lopped it up, adopted it, acquiesced to it, but then each one enforced it upon another.
Right.
Now, that's really where it is. Because again, everyone always had a question, the Jews lived in the Rhineland there for over 1,000 years. What, all of a sudden their neighbors just turned on them? Okay, so you have a maniacal leader, but how did that happen? Mm. And again, I'm taking a little bit of time to get to Scott Schara, but I'll never forget, I was walking with my wife and 4 kids, and we have the cutest baby. I mean, now she's almost 3. She was born right at that April 2020 era. It's horrible, horrible time to be alive. And, a white female in her 40s walks by this outside, kind of the typical stereotype age of a Karen. And, any other era would have been smiling at the kids. And she just looks at maybe my second to oldest. He's 9 years old at the time, and viciously motions, emphatically to put on a mask. And this is outdoors. Mm-hmm. And this is well after you would know that, it kept spreading despite it was ridiculous. And the look in her eye, I'm not kidding. I said to my wife, I was like, that person would put you in an oven. Like, it was a look, you deserve to die. Mind you, she was wearing it. So if it works, it works, right? So it trickled down to the people. So what we talk about in several testimonies is the worst aspect of what trickled down to the people. What's the worst aspect? Well, you might think, man, I am so gung-ho on COVID. I think it's so much of a problem. I want to control you. I want to do anything to you. But by golly, I'm going to treat that COVID because COVID's such a threat. Okay? Right. A 2-year-old needs to be wrestled to the ground, dragged off a plane for not wearing a mask. So certainly if I have a 70-year-old call up and say, hey, I got diabetes, I got heart condition. You know what? I just got COVID. Drop dead. We will not only not treat you, but we will do everything we can to block the treatment. And that's a big part of the book that was so revealing, that okay, this wasn't just a mistake, nanny state, even control. This was premeditated, and it was willful, and there was a psychological warfare to get the people involved in it. And this is where we rope in the medical profession along with the government, just like in the 1930s when they went along with the eugenics program. So Scott Schara, his daughter Grace, comes into the hospital with COVID, and he goes through how he shows all the receipts, how they literally killed her. They put an illegal DNR on her when she had maybe mild hypoxia type of thing that traditionally pneumonia you'd get out of the hospital in 1 or 2 days, didn't have to end there, and gave things that were contraindicated. So the same people who wouldn't give broad spectrum anti-inflammatories, maybe you think it doesn't work, certainly wouldn't harm, they gave things that were contraindicated. And this was a glimpse into what went on with hundreds of thousands of people: the illegal DNRs, the medical kidnappings, the contraindications, the opioids, the anti-anxieties that slow your breathing. It's the opposite of what you do. And you're thinking, wait, I'm a layman, I'm not a doctor, but anyone could look at that and say, how in the world could you think it's okay to do that? And that's where we realized there was this spirit of evilness that gripped the medical profession. And Naomi, this is what's scary. You could take off the mask mandates. You could take off vaccine mandates. And we haven't, by the way, and that's a big part of the book. But how do you fix a medical profession that has the spirit of death over it?
Well, profoundly put. And while you were speaking, I really was thinking, our books are kind of bookends of each other or mutually reinforce each other. And I mean the Pfizer Documents ebook that you mentioned, because the euthanasia or the death march that is intentional is so abundantly documented in both of our books. And there's no way, I think, to read either of our books, let alone both of them, without coming away being fully convinced that this was premeditated murder. It wasn't just a greedy corporation gone too far. It wasn't just a negligent, bloated bureaucracy that wasn't looking. This is murder. So the DoD piece has emerged since your book was published. I don't believe you address it in the book. Correct me if I'm wrong. So what, this keeps me up nights. Why would our own military, be in charge of a program that was aimed at killing and disabling America's own people, and especially its soldiers and sailors and Air Force?
That question, like almost every question of this era, I usually respond thusly. All of the potential answers to that question are bad. They're all bad. I mean, I got a question on my show yesterday. Naomi, somebody said, help me understand why it would help Pfizer's business model to create a product that would kill a bunch of people, kill a bunch of their customers. And I said, you're not their customer. Governments are the customer. And so when governments are guaranteeing you a certain threshold of success, then, if you look at the vSafe data, that pretty much coincides with the Rasmussen poll of adverse event rate, 7.7% of serious adverse events, including death. That means 92% of the time it's legit. Hey, that's efficiency. When you get to the level of corporations and bureaucracy and government and bureaucracy that colluded here, they'll take 92% efficiency across the board. So you're not their customers. And your question belies the fact that the soldiers they're not the stewards of those soldiers. Across the board here, the best you can say is that we're just, we're Bob Seger's feel like a number. We're serial numbers, we're files, we're chattel. That's the best you can say. The best you can say is that the greed is so overwhelming that any form of recognizing that people are made in the likeness and image of God, that there is something uniquely intrinsic about human worth, is just out the window in the pursuit of unprecedented greed. That is the most benign and innocent explanation here, is an unprecedented level of craven greed That's the benign, innocent explanation. And all the following explanations from that point forward just get increasingly sinister.
Well, and I was just going to say, the thing with that is that, since Steve came out with Fauci and Bargain, and this information has come out, I've argued that Fauci is not even the biggest issue now, because it is much broader. HHS would be more the typical captured government, rent seekers, pay for play, revolving door. This is DARPA. This is, Politico just had last month a report out on Chemical and Biologics Defense Program, how they're looking at warp speed now, after everything we know and see, that they admit, and they say that is a really good model, and they want to develop super immunizations that work, that remake your immune system. And you're looking at this and you're thinking, wait a minute, I don't even have to go back and say, what did they know? When did they know it? Like your ebook does. We do a little bit here. But right now, typically in history, you would cover it up and be done with it.
Right.
They
exactly.
put it on the child immunization schedule. Right. They go and develop ICD codes for recalcitrant people who don't want to be vaccinated. Then they're now developing another mRNA RSV shot. DARPA is constantly working on more gain of function, and alongside that, vaccines. So this is about a lot more than corporate greed. This is about a mentality of our government, led by the Defense Department, that believes that in order to beat China, we need to be like China. And the biomedical surveillance state is really much more built by DOD than HHS, and that should scare all of us.
Wow.
That's why you're hearing people talk about renewed calls, like Thomas Massey and others. Another church committee. Essentially, what we're talking about is, Operation Paperclip, MK Ultra, the kinds of stuff that came out of the first iteration of the Cold War, these are things like the church committee and other entities ended up uncovering, and now we're talking again about that history doesn't. I'll say it again. History doesn't just repeat; it rhymes. And when there's no accountability, you always get more. All of us here, either have been parented or are parents. Whatever bad behavior you do not punish, you always incentivize more of, period.
There's no question about that. Oh, gosh. Well, so Steve, you said, the most benign answer to DOD's oversight of this murder program and disability program is kind of greed and bureaucratic self-serving. What are a couple of the more nefarious, what are the things you're not saying that it could be?
Hashtag depopulation. Hashtag fascism. We have I think you and I had a conversation about this on my show recently, or maybe a previous time that you were on, that outside of some of the more sensitive culture war issues, the vast majority of political division in America, left and right, came from which sector did you most suspect would lead to some form of dystopian Orwellian end of liberty. Okay.
I didn't think it would be my former team. I didn't think it would be the left.
Well, it's everybody's former team. If you were left of center, you were very suspicious of corporations. And now you're the person that comedian Ryan Long mocks when he does parodies like, I hate corporations except Pfizer, and then they can experiment on me as much as they want. Okay. And on the right, we thought for sure it would be government. And now all this, and now all of a sudden, a lot of people wearing our uniform, just like you're like, hey, remember when we hated corporations? Evidence. Where is everyone? Right. Where's the posse? Where are my peeps? Well, right. Daniel and I are like, hey, remember when y'all were suspicious of big government? But hey, I guess if it comes from the Pentagon, then they can just do whatever the hell they want. They can charge what they want. They can do whatever they want. They can treat us however they want. As long as they wrap it around the flag, then it's totes legit, yo. And it turns out everybody was right and everybody was wrong, because we used to be able to play the corporate sector and the government sector on both sides of the aisle. You could play them off of one another competitively in the previous era to get some policy aim. They're not competitors anymore. They are syncretized. They are fused. You are watching full-on fascism has come to America.
And that is, just to remind everyone, that is indeed literally the definition of fascism, when there's no distinction between government and corporations. That's what pioneered. What did you want to say, Daniel?
No, I was just going to say that is the connection with the Third Reich. What the Fourth Reich does, first of all, it's a play on words from the Fourth Industrial Revolution that Klaus Schwab talks about. But you had these elements, but this exacerbates it times 100. The public-private partnership, the amazing technology, and now the global reach. You put those three together and you can't escape it. I mean, again, the surveillance that they have now. And a lot of this, tying back to DOD, they believe in, and the British military had documents on this. It gets into the transhumanism. A lot of this is the transhumanism, the mRNA technology, that we believe that God created people imperfectly, and it is our job to go and fix people and create the perfect soldier. So it starts with the soldiers, and that's where a lot of this comes from. And then it bleeds down to everyone. And this is what it is. It's a state of total state, that there's nothing you can't do. And what we warn people is, because we've become so accustomed. Hey, is there a mass mandate here? Wait, let's decode that. A mass mandate.
Right.
I am criminalizing your negative form of existence until you take a positive medical action on or in your body. If government could do that to you, quite literally, there's nothing they cannot do. That is end game. And if we don't end that, there is no end. And we talk about getting ahead of the curve. Self-spreading vaccines is technology they brag about they have there. Putting the mRNA in the cattle and the food. They understand people are onto it now, so they're going to come with a different play up the middle of that field. And that's what we have to be prepared for. They believe that you are a speck of dust in their hand and there's nothing they cannot do to you. That is why it is so important that we kind of create our own immunization program, legally, medically, morally, constitutionally, to reaffirm the Nuremberg Code.
Absolutely. Can I add to that really quick? Just really quick. What the last few years demonstrated more than anything else is that the political paradigm and the left-right diagram politically is obsolete. The political paradigm has utterly shifted. The ground has shifted completely underneath our feet. For when I first got into this business full time about 15 years ago now. Bill Maher was doing, was it Religulous? I think was the name of the documentary about people like me, frankly. Okay. And I spent whole shows going back and taking clips and responding to it. I got into this. I said this to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. When him and I did a special together in Nashville about a month or so ago. And I looked at him and I said, brother, when I got into this business, it was to defeat people like you. Now I'm going to do something I almost never do and ask, can I get a picture with you? I didn't change my views on anything. I don't know if you have either. But here's the thing. Here's what's changed. Here's how I went from doing whole shows where I argued against Bill Maher to now doing shows where him and I are singing this off the same hymnal. Here's what's changed. The old argument used to be, we all agreed that we are some form of individual agents with some endowed individual worth and dignity and free agency and conscience. The argument was, how far could I take that right of conscience? Right. The argument was, did anybody other than my own humanity, or if I'm going to hurt somebody else or a God, what limited how far I would take that conscience? Okay. That was the argument. That was really the essence of the worldview argument, was that if I, and that's where you get into these sensitive culture war issues. Well, I think I'm not accountable to anybody other than my own conscience. I think you're accountable to a God. And that was the debate. Now the debate is, do you have conscience at all? Do you have agency at all? Do you have autonomy at all? Am I a free person at all? And that's really the debate. We don't have the luxury of the debates of the 80s and 90s and the aughts anymore. We are literally debating the very first fundamental of liberty right now. Am I an actual person endowed by the laws of nature or nature's God with certain inalienable rights or not? Period. That's the debate now.
Or does the government fully control everything you do? And this is what we're seeing now. I think a great example is, environmentalists who think, well, if you think carbon dioxide is a pollutant that you have to literally regress the standard of living for everyone and cause so much collateral damage to rectify it. Well, when you have vinyl chloride and the biggest carcinogen spill, this would be their Super Bowl. But it's dead silence. It's dead. And the answer is, it's not about environmentalism. It's not about gender. It's not about racial justice. It's not about helping the poor or not helping the poor. It's about whatever achieves total state control. And it's scary at how easily they could turn on and off that faucet. So one of the things we discuss in the book is, again, this juxtaposition with treatment. Oh my gosh, you need to do everything you can for COVID. Well, except for treat it outpatient so you don't flood the hospitals. And it's like, ivermectin, Nobel Prize winning drug. No one could say it's not safe. Even a doctor's prescription, a pharmacist could deny it. But then Paxlovid, which is a new drug mixed with an AIDS drug, has more than 30 categories of contraindications with many major categories of drugs that almost any senior is going to be on, statins and steroids. A pharmacist could dispense it without a test now and without a doctor's prescription. Oh, and by the way, Naomi, whatever happened to remdesivir, it is still the standard of care to this day, even though not a single doctor will tell you it's safe and effective. Doesn't matter. We're doing it anyway. We're doing it.
So this brings us full circle to Mengele. I mean, and let's go back to the format of your wonderful book. You structured it, as I mentioned earlier, as a prosecution, essentially. So my question, or as a trial, right? So my question to you is, have you heard from lawyers who are using it for legal action? And follow up to that, what do you think the odds are of a Nuremberg trial? Why aren't we seeing criminal filings? Why is it so slow to drag these? I mean, between all of our books, that we've fully documented the crimes. So what's holding things up in your view?
Let me take the second one first, and I'll let Daniel have the other one. One of the things that when I asked Ron Johnson, because he was part of that special that I did with RFK Jr. and some others a couple of months ago, and I asked Ron Johnson, the senator from Wisconsin, and it's rare nowadays that, frankly, any politician tells me things I really didn't already know. He's been doing it for the last couple of years. He has done absolutely heroic yeoman's work on this topic and deserves universal praise for it. And I asked him, what would it take to get to a Nuremberg 2? And he pointed out that Ike opened the camps, that there were rumors and thoughts and murmurs about what was really going on. People knew there were disappearances, but it really wasn't until much of the Third Reich had been vanquished, and they go into places like Auschwitz and Dachau, and the soldiers, and some of those famous black and white reels where the soldiers come out with ashen faces and they're vomit inducing what they had just witnessed the remnants of. And I demanded, hey, roll tape. The world has to see this. And that exposure brought it to critical mass. But this is now where I would say, and this goes back to what Daniel said a minute ago, Naomi. Many Germans did not actively participate in this. Now they permissively participated. They didn't rise up to stop it. There weren't acts of civil disobedience. But most Germans were not actively rounding up their Jewish or Gypsy or gay neighbors. Okay, they just permissively went along with it. In our case here, as Daniel pointed out a little while ago, this permeated to such a granular molecular level. Less than 15% of American adults didn't take any of the gene juice, less than 15%. That means a lot of people, for there to be a reckoning, it's one thing to say, finally, my conscience is right. I should have spoken up. Now we have a chance. Go get those other people that did the bad stuff and let's put them on trial. Okay. Now, though, we masked ourselves. We forced other people to do it. We jabbed our kids. We forced other people to do it. So someone's saying, hey, I took that because I needed to have a job. Okay. And so I think in this case, I don't think it's the political class necessarily standing in the way of this kind of a reckoning, as much as how much does the average person who want to consider that they might be a ticking time bomb right now, they might be the next died suddenly, the next collapse suddenly, they might be the person whose sperm motility got wrecked and that can't get their wife pregnant, they might be the woman who just got pregnant and might end up getting a miscarriage now, right? And so and since it might not be me, and it probably won't be, okay, going over this just adds worry, anxiety. I'll cross that bridge if we come to it. Can we all just move on? That was crazy. That was wrecked. It was unprecedented. Let's just move on. Forget that it ever happened. That's more human nature. When it permeated at this much of a systemic level, there is not a household in America. Stop and think about this. There isn't a household in America that wasn't touched by this negatively or punitively some way. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's getting the people to say that they are willing to confront what they assented to. I think that's your initial challenge, much more than getting action from the political class.
Understood. What are the mechanics of getting a Nuremberg trial? I mean, what did Senator Johnson say would be the mechanics of getting a trial going?
He actually asked me that question, and what I'm a proponent of is, and this is what blew my mind. I also sat down here in this man cave on March 16th, reading the Imperial College survey, and I suck at math, but I'm really good at deciphering people's mathematical conclusions, because surveys and models are not math; they're philosophy. The algorithms are nothing other than the numbers and the variables itemizing someone's philosophical assumptions going into whatever it is that they're testing or surveying or modeling. And the whole thing is full of fallacies. It's just full of bunk. And I sat down here on March 16th and I thought to myself, oh man, but listen, I don't have a 4-year degree. I majored in Super Tecmo Bowl chicks and intramural basketball in college. Okay. And so I don't want, and the last thing we need is another proxy for the global warming debate where it's Steve Deace and Breitbart and the Blaze against academia. Okay. Here's what blew my mind from day one. Professors at Oxford Center for Evidence-Based Medicine, noted right-wing institution, right away called BS on Imperial College. John Ioannidis, Jay Bhattacharya from Stanford University, top 5 med school in the country. Harvey Risch might be the most academically cited epidemiologist in the history of this republic, Yale. You have, I believe the guy that designed the VAERS for CDC from Harvard, I believe he's a socialist. Okay. Mm-hmm. I mean, there were a lot right away. There were a lot of high ranking academics that I probably have a host of disagreements with that right away saw the same ideological or logical and numerical and statistical fallacies here that the whole world was falling for. And so, to me, those people that have the credentials, kept their wits about them, maintain their humanity, to me, they're the ones that preside over that tribunal because they demonstrated both the credentials and character that would esteem them to have that kind of position.
Understood.
Well, look, I would just say that, like it says in the Bible, you can't capture the land in one day. You can't win over the world in one day. You need gradations. And I think we lay out in our last chapter, it's not an all or nothing proposition. It's a matter of, look, the Constitution begins with we the people, never again must begin with we the people. You start at an individual county level in the state legislatures. So it means it's legislation, it's laws, it's hearings. So, county hearings, because a lot of this, remember, it started, we think, there's not enough power at a federal level with Joe Biden as president. Yeah, but this really started at a state and local level. The COVID fascism started at a state and local level. You could fix it. The principles, a great example, Collier County, Florida, just returned the money given to pimp the vaccines in their county. And all these localities got the money. We're not taking it. We're not doing it. We're not participating in the surveillance state. In politics, you have a feeding frenzy. You create a snowballing effect that I think we have to build up to that. Here's the scary thing. I do think we're going to get there because unfortunately we're right. And you read one of your, 60 or so papers in that ebook, and you will see that, and because we're already reaching critical mass in the polling data, you're seeing it. Too many people are dying. This is going to happen. But here's the thing that we're trying to head off. They're going to engage in a limited hangout. Hang out on a limited level. Oh, this is the problem. These are the people that are the problem, and done, while they continue to build the biomedical security state, the experimentations, the mRNA, the transhumanism, and all that. We have to make sure we channel that to where it's going to make a difference. We need an unlimited hangout. And the other question is, how quickly could we do it? How many more people have to die before we can get treatment and proper research out? Because right now you can't recognize vaccine injury, so you can't treat it. So you don't have these ticking time bombs with the subclinical myocarditis. And then the RSV shot is coming out in a few months. That is a given. We will be proven right. Do we have to go through another 2 years of millions of VAERS reports on that before we get it shut down? Or are we able to build that critical mass? So I'm just going to give one example that I think is a centerpiece item of, after the trial, what we believe is part of the rendering the verdict, action items in your state legislatures. And that is, again, it's not enough to pass a law, because as Steve always says, we're not a nation of laws, as we well learned. We're a nation of political will. So I wouldn't want to quietly get something on the books without having a vocal, loud political fight. What I'm advocating for is that we reaffirm Nuremberg in every state's constitution. States are a lot easier to amend than the federal constitution. And the idea is, and we have language in West Virginia and Iowa, Steve's home state, we're trying to get more states. You get the people themselves to have a campaign on the 2024 presidential ballot, the right of a person to refuse any medical procedure or device or prophylactic shall not be questioned or interfered with. The right of a person to a public accommodation, equal protection of the law shall not be denied or infringed upon because of the exercise of that right. That is the principle we need to reaffirm. And the best way to do it is through a public campaign with a ballot initiative.
Understood. Well, that is a very helpful note that at the end of the book, there's literally a blueprint for how people mobilize at the county and state level to use your language. Part of me is sad as I listen to you. It's a service to the country, but I'm sad because this is already the law of the land, right? People don't realize that the Nuremberg Law is already the law. It's already illegal to experiment on people. It's already illegal to withhold informed consent. Is that not correct, Daniel?
I mean, it is truly shocking. Blackstone, we always like to say individual liberty, right? I believe in liberty. Who doesn't? Right. The basic definition, according to Blackstone, of individual liberty is to be able to walk in locomotion without restraint, or being arrested. And we are saying that you, in order to participate in society, and sometimes to even function, you must take a medical device. If that were constitutional, we quite literally do not have a Bill of Rights, a Constitution, or anything, because that is individual liberty at its most basic sense. So, of course, it's part of the law. We've been a part of the Helsinki Protocol as well. And mind you, these were things when you sign up for a clinical trial, what must be done. Here, we made the entire world a clinical trial and didn't even ask you permission to initially sign up, much less, obviously precept 9 that you have to abort the experimentation as soon as you see that there's problems in your clinical judgment. So of course it's a problem, but again, this is why we need to win the argument, and it's got to be loud. And I feel and fear that we have a very narrow window here, where on the one hand, the public's kind of like, yeah, this is dumb. This was dumb. 70-80% of the public thinks this was dumb. We shouldn't have done it. They've moved on. But you wait a little longer, nobody will care as they ratchet up the biomedical surveillance state, and the experimentation state.
Absolutely. Well, we only have a few minutes left, and thank you for that. I mean, you're both laying it out so clearly and eloquently. Um, I'm torn. I want to ask why, if the global leaders and meta leaders were going to crack down on the world and strip Western Europe and all the free nations of liberty in 2020 to 2023, why did they allow and build up and invest in a quite sophisticated post-World War II order based on human rights and dignity and freedom and autonomy and secure borders and so on? I mean, it seems bizarre that there was such an about face. Why did they, if this was the plan all along, why have we had the last 65 to 70 years of everyone agreeing that individual rights matter, at least in the West?
Daniel, I'll let you take that one first.
Naomi, I really keep coming back to this, and I don't know how to avoid it. The reality is they had to wait for the right generation. I could say they had to wait for the technology, and but they've had a lot of this technology for a while, at least sufficient technology to certainly enforce this. Although they did need Zoom. Without that, they really could not have created this parallel metaverse. Right. Transhuman-like living. Right. But the reality is they had to wait for the right generation. Wow. And I do think that, you look at how broken the family structure is. You look at how broken the church is. You look at how broken Generation Z is and millennials, and the way they live, the drug overdoses, the depression, the mental problems, the lack of purpose in life. One of the things I told Steve that I was wrong about, with this thing, when we're maybe about a month into this, I said to Steve, look, okay, we're the crusty social conservatives here, but you know what? We're going to benefit from generation licentiousness, because at some point they can't do without their stuff. They can't do with their bars closed and all the stuff they do. But what I was not prepared for was the stoicism, the dogmatic adherence that we saw. Again, almost like, this is almost like medieval times. We always used to laugh about Sharia law and, hey, women walking around like that and being forced to cover their faces. That could never, I knew America was profligate. It was, decadent, but we love our stuff. We don't like being told what to do. And America used to be that way. But this generation, it was yearning for a sense of belief, a sense of purpose. And eventually they scared the bejesus out of the seniors. But if you look, and there's polling data on this, the first few months, the seniors actually didn't buy into this. It was the young people who themselves were never in danger of this. It was a ritual. It was a set of a code of belief. Naomi, in our religion, at 8 days old, you get a circumcision. So this was where you're rid of passage. Right. You're to live in the world, you must put on the cloth. You have to be a man of the cloth, and you get your injection. And I got my card, and I am a member. They needed to belong. I think it's only in a generation that was so vacuous that this could have taken off, and that's when they seized the opportunity.
Well, that is completely correct. This is COVID. Naomi was not an outlier. It's a harvest.
Oh, wow.
All right. This was a reaping that a generation. It's come to the point. I wish we'd go back to just good old fashioned fornication. All right. Now we're so shut in. Now pornography is so rampant. Now you can't even get guys to chase girls anymore. You can't even get guys to chase women anymore. Hey, I got my right hand. I got the internet. I get my release and move on, and don't have to worry about taking care of anybody or having responsibility for myself. It's comprehensive nihilism. We're beyond decadence now. It's just comprehensive nihilism. We're the Joaquin Phoenix Joker. Heath Ledger's Joker, at least, was out to prove a point. The Joaquin Phoenix Joker, right before he blows Robert De Niro away, looks into the camera and says, I don't believe in anything. And that's where we are. And so something had to replace that God-shaped hole in the heart. Something had to give us some hermeneutical and exegetical and existential meaning, and this did. And you're talking about a religion.
You're absolutely right. This all makes perfect sense. Well, let me close then with the question that I have to ask. We all recognize that the Nazi era was a manifestation of evil, and Daniel and I have spoken about this. You and I probably have too, Steve. But how did a whole medical establishment turn from life to death overnight? How did everyone in lockstep head toward darkness? What I'm asking is, from two different faith traditions, each of you derive, is there a metaphysical explanation you have? How did evil manifest so comprehensively, so quickly? What's your kind of spiritual or theological or, hermeneutical view of that? That's my
to me, to me, you're living in a post-Christian America, the first truly post-Christian generation in the history of the country. Mm-hmm. And so you're watching Western civilization, or what we used to call Christendom. You are watching it collapse comprehensively. And so as it collapses, what will replace it? We will go back to what we were before Western civilization, which is the Dark Ages. Mm-hmm. Now, the new Dark Ages that we will return to, if we don't see the sort of moral and spiritual revival that gave birth to the West in the first place, if we don't see a replay of that, we will return to the Dark Ages. Now, we're not going to have rats running around with feces that we're breathing in and ingesting to create bubonic plague and killing, one half of the planet. Mm-hmm. We're technologically too advanced for that. This will be a technocratic Dark Ages. Mm-hmm. You'll have a car. It'll be an electric, and they'll tell you how far you can go and have a central hub control of it. You'll have a phone, a communication device. They'll be able to turn it on and off, and they'll tell you who you can talk to, what you can and cannot see. You'll have right? Basically, we're talking about China. That's essentially what we're talking about is China. What is fascinating is the two of the most imposing forces in America's culture war, the gay rights movement and the Christian church, are simultaneously both crushed in China. Okay? All right. They're completely at ideological loggerheads here and do not believe they can coexist. In China, we're like, we can't allow either one of those things to happen. They crush them both. Why? Because they both, albeit from dramatically different perspectives, view themselves as some form of fulfillment of the championing of individual expression and worth. Okay. And so all that will go away as we go to the total state, and you will be totally beholden to the state in a technocratic Dark Ages. That's the minimum stakes we're playing for here. And on a high-end stakes, I do think it is possible we are living in biblical fulfillment kind of an era. This is the first time in all of human history that it was possible that you could have a global scheme in place where you could not buy, sell, work, do anything at all without compliance to some faceless government that you never voted for, that you don't interact with, that is from some central hub that governs the world. That's never been able to exist before in all of human history until right now.
That's the hallmark of the Great Reset and the global reach of the Fourth Reich. There is no America landing at Omaha Beach to liberate, it's one country. Okay, they take over a continent, but you'll always have competing interests. You'll have competing nation states. They have synchronized the elites of every Western nation to work, and every nation that has wealth to work together. And I would say, in terms of the doctors and how an entire medical establishment gets roped into this, and this is really one of the vexing questions and one of the scariest observations of this book, of this entire last 3 years, I would say there's a practical answer that mixes in with a theological answer as well. There's a reason why they had to stamp out every last vestige of dissent. Steve and I were joking the whole time. It's like, we're a bunch of poor slobs here. We have nothing, nobody. They had the masters of the universe, but they had people dedicated to every one of my columns. I was like, what do you care? So like one thing, like what can I do to you guys? I mean, you have everything, corporations, governments, global media, tech, banking. There's nothing you don't have. There's nothing. But like a tiny crack of a door open in a dark room, light permeates it, and falsehood cannot coexist with a morsel of truth, of that light. And that's a practical thing. So when you make sure no one else knows something, even if you suspect there's something wrong, no one wants to be that guy to stand out. So everyone's looking around. I also believe theologically, the Satan does succeed more. He gets turbocharged. He gets tailwinds when there is no force of good standing up. He is able to achieve exponentially greater accomplishments that naturally just don't make sense. Like, how could you get everyone to go along with that? It's because good people remain silent. And that's why they had to do everything they can to make sure you didn't have a 1%, 2% dissent. You'd lose your medical license. You'll lose your job. And when you have darkness with no light, then it's unlimited what you can do to another human being and the illogical, inhumane things you could believe in. When you go to Bible school, Jewish school, you learn about paganism and idolatry, and it was always weird. Like, what does that mean? Like, what does it mean you bow down? There's the old story with Abraham and his father, where Abraham smashed all the idols in his father's idol store, and then he put the hammer in the hand of the big one. And when his father came back, he was furious. He said to him, what's up? What happened here? And he said, well, the big one, got into a fight and competed for all the food and destroyed the other ones. He's like, don't give me that. It can't do that. So Abraham said, so then why do you worship it? and we were able to live through a time. It just happened last month. The New York City Health Department put out on Twitter consecutive tweets. Number one, if you had the shots, you're more likely to get these variants of COVID, to contract these variants. And then the second one was, therefore, you have to make sure you get the shots. And it would be the same thing. You need to wear a mask. You're spreading you're killing me. Wait, but you're wearing it. You're wearing the mask. It is a degree. It's a degree, a cloud of darkness could create something so illogical and therefore so inhumane and immoral. And that's the ultimate lesson, that you got to be that one man standing up, and it grows like wildfire. We can never allow again unanimity of opinion behind something like this to occur again.
Amen.
Well said, both of you. I sadly we could talk for hours. I hope we get to again. There's so much in this rich, important book, Forth Reich, and tell people where they can find it and where they can find both of your writing and podcasts and videos, please.
The publishers always get mad if we don't tell people to go to Amazon, because it's really the only ranking system that matters anymore. Okay. Even though Jeff Bezos doesn't need any more money, but apparently we do. All right. So go to Rise of the Fourth Reich, confronting COVID fascism with a new Nuremberg trial. So this never happens again. You can get it at Amazon, Books A Million, Barnes and Noble, but Amazon's the most important ranking system right now in the industry. So if it's not a moral objection, we would appreciate if you would go there.
Thank you. And where can people find you, Steve?
Just subscribe to the podcast. Look for Steve Deace Show on iTunes, Stitcher, Amazon, Spotify, etc.
Thank you. And how about you, Daniel?
And I'm at Conservative Review on iTunes or Stitcher. And look, if you like the book, I have weekly columns, daily columns on this and many other issues at The Blaze, at Conservative Review. And in addition to purchasing the book, if you could adopt a member of Congress or your state legislature to go and hand one of these books to them so they have that blueprint, that understanding of what happened, file online with your library to have them get it in the library. The point is to get this issue everywhere, raise the prominence of the issue. Time is of the essence.
Absolutely. Thank you, gentlemen, both, for The Rise of the Fourth Reich, an unmissable book, a landmark book, something everyone should read and share and gift. And thank you so much for spending time with us. This is Naomi Wolf of DailyClout. And remember, everyone, to support us as well, so we can keep bringing you these incredible cutting-edge thinkers, the people who are keeping civilization alive and holding back the darkness. Thank you so much. Thank you both.
Take care.